Hello, welcome to Learning Buzzers Educational Insights podcast, episode 2, which is titled Child Rearing Practices Yesterday and Today. I'm Dr. Dina Abdulrazak, the advisor to Learning Buzzers. I hope that you had a chance to watch our first episode to find out what Learning Buzzers focuses on in terms of operations and services. Just to give you a little bit of an idea about my background is in education and specifically in educational psychology and educational leadership. So we are going to be focusing today on child rearing practices. And from the title, I'm guessing that you probably expect that there will be some kind of comparative analysis between child rearing practices of the past and child rearing practices of today. And if you guess this, then you really guessed right. But before we talk about anything in relation to the past and to the present and what's happening in terms of trends today with child rearing practices, I would like to kick off the episode with a very famous poem from a very well-known author, philosopher, poet, sculptor, painter, by the name, of course, of Gibran Khalil Gibran. So Gibran has this very famous poem. Its title is On Children, and in it he is really addressing parents. So first I'm going to recite the poem to you, and then as we are speaking during the episode, I am going to be referring to some of the lines in this poem. So the poem goes as follows. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You're the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. So this beautiful poem and very, very philosophically deep poem has a lot of important points and insights on child rearing practices. But before we explain it or before we refer to it in any way, what I would like to do is to explain why it is really important and why I see that a comparative analysis is really needed. So I'm going to give you the justification for that. Well, I guess, the reason why I think a comparative analysis is needed is because sometimes in certain circles, we feel like when we're talking, there is always this kind of competition between whether how we as a generation were brought up as children is better than how children are being brought up today. And honestly, I mean, this makes us wonder, like, is this issue or this question valid to begin with? I mean, is it really the case that child rearing practices in the past or how we were brought up are actually, better than what's going on today? Well, to tackle this question, let's first look at what child rearing practices of yesterday and today focus on. So I'm going to start with the past. I'm going to start with yesterday, and we will notice maybe some obvious things, like, for example, in the past, there tend to be like a lot of emphasis on discipline, disciplining children, setting rules, making sure that the children are following the rules. And of course, if the rules were not followed, there were consequences. At the same time, there was this expectation that children will have certain chores and responsibilities to fulfill. And again, if they did not fulfill them and fulfill them well, there were also some consequences. Now, in the past, there wasn't much emphasis on children's voice, and children's voice was not always heard, if at all. And what we mean by this is that children were not really given much of an opportunity to express their thoughts or express their feelings, and to do it, so openly and freely. That was not very, very accepted or very allowed. And unfortunately, like in some cases, there was spanking and there was beating. There was some kind of physical punishment that followed if a child, for example, tried to speak up or tried to answer back or whatever, and also if they misbehaved. So there were these things that were emphasized, and these are some of the more obvious things. And at the same time, something maybe which was taken for granted and is not as obvious for people is that in the past, children used to have like more independent time away from the parents. And what we mean by independent time is like time spent in play, usually outdoors, and also time spent in other children's houses, where children used to go and visit their friends and play in their friends' houses, or play outside. And usually all of this was happening without the supervision of the parents. Like, the parents were not there 24/7 or always with the child to make sure that they are safe and that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and not harming themselves in any way or whatever. So there was that independent time away from the parents. Now, if we compare all of this with the trends that we see nowadays, we notice that nowadays there tends to be like more attention given to kids. So there is a focus on spending time with kids and spending quality time with kids. That is really prioritized. It's very important. And at the same time, we notice that there is more sheltering of children, to the point where sometimes we achieve what is known as sheltered upbringing. And I will explain what I mean by sheltered upbringing. So sheltered upbringing, it refers to a life in which someone, here the child, is being too protected by their parents from difficult or unpleasant experiences. And we notice this nowadays, that we are always worried that we don't want the child to see certain things or hear certain things. We want to do everything like privately away from them. We think that they should not be seeing this or doing things in front of them, that's not good, etc. So there's this sheltering, this protection of the child, because we always feel that maybe in a way the child is going to get harmed either emotionally or psychologically in some way. So there tends to be like a lot of care that's being given, a lot of teaching that's being given to a child by the parents or by other adults in their life. And also we notice that these children who grow up to be as adults and who have been through like a sheltered kind of upbringing, usually they would not have had the opportunity to experience really the outside world, or the outside world away from their family, and they may be like less prepared for the challenges of adult life, because it's like they've been in this bubble, and then when they are out in life all on their own without their parents being there. It becomes really hard for them to deal with difficult circumstances or difficult situations because they're just not used to functioning independently and without supervision. Now, another thing we notice, of course, as a trend nowadays is that there's a lot of focus on respecting children's voice, and children's voice must be heard. So there is this respect for the child in terms of the opinions that they may have, the thoughts that they may have, the feelings, and expressing all of that. All of that is allowed and it is actually encouraged. And if it's not done, then, the parent who does not do it is like frowned upon. Now, also nowadays, there tends to be like less maybe firmness or assertiveness usually on the part of the parents, and maybe it's because the child now can voice their opinion, so they find really ways to negotiate their ways around the parents and get in the end what they need. And so this makes the parents seem as if that they're not being as firm or as assertive as they can be or should be. Now, as I said before, we're always worrying about the child being harmed somehow nowadays, psychologically or emotionally. It's like, we are worried about the impact of almost everything on the child. And although nowadays there is independent play, now we notice that this play is usually done individually. So it's independent from the parents, but it is usually done individually inside the house and under the eye or the supervision of the parents or some adult, where the child is usually busy like playing computer games or PlayStation, or they're sitting on their phone on social media or what have you. So these are really like, of course, the main trends that we see, and I'm not saying that everyone like fits in these categories or trends. However, more or less, this is what we notice. Now, looking at these differences and at other differences, we tend to sometimes approach child rearing practices as if like they were bad in the past and that now they are better. There's more respect for the child, more attention for the child, more time spent with the child, and all of that. Now, on the surface, this may seem to be true, that maybe, yes, there are better things that are happening nowadays. However, I mean, does this mean that we always need to approach the child rearing practices of the past as something more or less like mistakes that were done, let's say, by our parents or grandparents, and things that we should try not to repeat ourselves as parents? I mean, not necessarily so, because it's really very important, I mean, to be able to see why many of the child rearing practices from the past are really important, and why it is very important not just to maintain them, but also where they have been lost, it is important to revive them. There is a need to revive some of the old practices because they come with many, many benefits. And to understand this, it is important to conduct an analysis of the benefits of yesterday's practices. So we are going to move to that, just analyzing yesterday's practices, taking each practice and looking at what are really its benefits. So for instance, if we take the first practice, which is enforcing discipline at home in childhood. Now, this is really very important because what it tends to lead to is discipline in many other things in life, but especially discipline at work. So a child who is brought up at home to be punctual and organized and to fulfill their duties on time and to take responsibility and be accountable, what happens is that they become habituated to all of these things. Not just, I mean, habituated in terms of, looking at these things as being something natural or a part of life, or not habituated just in terms of attitude, but also habituated in terms of behavior. So all of these things become habits of mind, habits of attitude, and also habits, of behavior, which is very, very important. Similarly, if we take the second practice, which is enforcement of rules at home, enforcement of rules at home, especially rules governing how children should behave towards their elders, their parents, their grandparents, other, older people. I mean, this is very important because it teaches a child from a very young age respect towards others, and in particular, elders and women. And the reason why I mention elders and women is because of actually a story that happened with me not long ago, which really got me, thinking. And this story was one time when I was traveling. So we arrived at an airport, and actually we had to depart the plane, and we were put on a bus, and the bus had to transport us all the way to the airport hall. So when I got on the bus was really crammed and all the seats were taken, and that was okay. So I stood and I was holding on to the handle in the bus. And then this lady, pregnant lady, she comes on the bus, and she's carrying a young child in her arm, a diaper bag, and pulling another carry-on bag with her. And of course, when she came on the bus, the first thing that I expected was that one of the young men sitting on a seat is going to actually get up and offer her his seat. Now, did that happen? It did not happen. And, I was really very, very surprised and shocked in a way, like, what's wrong with these young men? I mean, can't they see that this is a woman pregnant with a young child, and just being able to stand in the bus and stay stable and not lose her balance with all with her condition, I mean, is difficult. And so I felt that this was really very rude from them. I felt really that it was not just rude, but it was an inability to step away from their own needs and to really be able to cater to the needs of others. So in a way, it is selfishness. But I mean, if these children or these young adults were, as children, raised to have respect for elders, to have respect to women who are, naturally, physically more vulnerable, and the, weaker sex, if they were raised in that way, then automatically, without even thinking, they would have actually done something positive and offered that woman their seat. But that did not happen. So it's very important to enforce such rules governing how children behave towards elders from a very young age. And this was really a very big thing in the past. Now, to take another practice from the past, having specific chores and responsibilities in childhood. Now, this is really very important because what it can lead to basically are more supportive adults, especially adults in relationships, like in marriages between spouses, or also in relationships where these adults have to support others, especially like their elders, etc. Now, why? Because when, as a child, these children were given chores and given responsibilities, and they were made to do them, and they got habituated to doing them, then what happens is when they enter into such relationships as adults, these responsibilities and chores no longer feel like a burden, but they feel naturally a part of life. And because they had learned to take them seriously, they will continue to do so. And this really will help them in having better relationships, because honestly, their partner would not want to be with them in a relationship where they are not being supportive and not doing their part. I mean, no matter the love, or no matter how much they're used to each other, love is not enough in the long run. And being used to a person is not enough if the both of them are not really supporting one another. Now, another important practice that we talked about is the independent time of the children that the children spend away from their parents, playing outside, playing in other children's houses. Now, this is really very important because what it does is it exposes a child socially to many different personalities, social incidents and circumstances, and even social problems, which in itself is healthy, as this, places the child in the position of having to practice problem-solving skills, negotiation, and conflict resolution skills. And all of this really helps in adulthood, where the problems tend to naturally be way more complex. So really, spending independent time away from the parents and with others and in socially interactive environments empowers children to grow into more socially competent adults in terms of analytic and critical thinking, and also in terms of interpersonal and emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is really very important for success in life, in everything. I mean, many researchers have shown that EQ, the emotional quotient, is much more important than IQ, the intelligence quotient, when it comes to success. So, to conclude, such practices from the past, like enforcing discipline and rules at home, assigning children chores and responsibilities, providing children independent time away from the sheltering of the parents, to be spent with other children, preferably outdoors or in a socially interactive environment, are practices to stay. We should preserve them, and we need to continue with them and not leave them to become a thing of the past. And now, this, does not mean that the child rearing practices of today are not good or not good enough, or that they are to be thrown out the window. On the contrary, today's and yesterday's child rearing practices are two pieces of the same puzzle and should not be always regarded as rivals. So I will repeat this again because I cannot, stress it enough. Today's and yesterday's child rearing practices are two pieces of the same puzzle and should not always be regarded as rivals. Why is that? Because the discipline and the rules, the chores and the responsibilities, the independent time spent with other children away from the parents, they will all yield better results actually if they're paired with sufficient attention being given to children and with, some parental time, especially quality time shared with the children. Also, all of these practices, they will become more fruitful when children's voice is heard and when children are involved in setting the rules and in identifying the responsibilities that they must shoulder. So we're going to keep the rules, we're going to keep the responsibilities, but also we are going to bring in the child's voice. We're going to give children that opportunity to give their opinion and to help and be involved in setting the rules and in identifying the responsibilities, because actually that will make them more serious about fulfilling the responsibilities and obeying the rules. Now, hearing children's voice is really also very important and involving them in decision making, because this will give them a sense of being trusted. They feel that they are trusted. They feel that they are more accepted and worthy, which ultimately raises their self-esteem. And self-esteem, although, research shows us that it does not necessarily lead to improved performance or to better task performance. However, what research does show us that high self-esteem facilitates persistence after failure. So this is really the importance of high self-esteem. So when a child fails to fulfill a certain responsibility or to fulfill it well, or when they fail to follow a certain rule, meaning when they mess up, but they have high self-esteem, what this will do is that it will increase the chances of them wanting to try to get the task or to obey the rule the next time. So what this indicates is that the child will have the motivation to learn from their own mistakes and to seek not to repeat those mistakes, as to, continue being trusted and accepted by, the adults that care for them and love them, which is really very, very important for them. What's also important for children is sheltering children, and sheltering them not in terms of, sheltered upbringing, but sheltering them in times of failure and when they mess up. And what we mean by sheltering them is protecting the children from their own negative feelings towards their abilities, meaning protecting them from developing a negative self-concept, which really materializes in feelings like I am a failure. So the child starts feeling I'm a failure, or they lack the ability to complete tasks. They start telling themselves I'm unable to do anything, I'm unable to manage my time, I'm not smart enough to plan things right, so as to fulfill my responsibilities, etc. All of these indicate really a negative self-concept, which is not healthy at all. And the reason why we need to protect the child from developing a negative self-concept is because this feeling, feeling incapable, it can lower a child's self-esteem. It can make them, start feeling bad towards themselves, hating themselves, not liking themselves, which can, of course, make them, as we said before, give up easily on things and refuse to persist in doing what they are supposed to be doing, especially when they fail. So to ensure that a child's self-concept remains positive, what do parents need to do? Parents have to continuously remind their children of all their strengths and capabilities, talents, and all the good things that they can actually do and are good at. So they should emphasize to them that making mistakes is a natural part of life, and that, the mistakes are there to teach them how to basically learn from them and get better. So really, this is the takeaway from today. And before I just close this episode, now I would like to take you back to the famous poem that we started our episode with, which is the poem On Children by Gibran Khalil Gibran. And I want to stop at some lines and highlight what those lines really mean in terms of what we just talked about. So one line that I want to stop at is the following. When he says, you may give your children love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. So really, what this emphasizes and highlights, it highlights the importance of children being given a voice, of children being involved in the decision making, as we mentioned. Now, the second line I want to stop at is when he says, you may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. So you can be like them if you want in some things, but do not try to force them to be like you or make them like you. Now, what does this highlight? This highlights the importance of giving children some independence, especially in social interactions, so that they can develop their own ideas, solutions to problems, and approaches to life, which may not always, of course, be identical to yours. But does it mean that if it's not identical to yours, it's necessarily bad? No, actually, sometimes it may be much better than yours, right? So this is very important, giving them that independence. Now, another line I want to stop at is when he says, let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. So let your bending in the archer here, he means by the creator, right? So let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. So what the bending symbolizes really is the need for parents to be a bit sometimes lenient or flexible. What this means is that yes, rules and discipline are good, but not to the extent that they become really very, very harsh, and especially harsh enough to cause your child misery, right? So this is why Gibran is emphasizing that we need to bend sometimes. We need to be flexible and lenient, especially if this is going to move us away from causing our children misery and making them, glad. So that, or happy, and that is okay. And finally, the last line I want to stop at is what he says. He says, and this is like completing what we said just now about how it's important for us sometimes to be lenient and flexible. But however, Gibran says, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, he meaning the creator, for even as he, the creator, loves the arrow that flies, the child, the children, so he, the creator, loves also the bow that is stable. The bow is the parent. So the creator also loves the parent that is stable. So what he is saying, on the one hand, it's okay to be lenient and flexible, but at the same time, we need to be stable in our child rearing practices. And what stable, the word stable here symbolizes is fairness, assertiveness, and mainly consistency in how we bring up children, which really, if you think about it, in psychology, these are some of the main pillars of best practices when it comes to child rearing in any age or time, whether, yesterday or today. So it's very important that we can be firm when we need to be firm and assertive, and more important, we have to be very consistent in how we deal with children. Not one time say yes and one time say no, and then the child, starts getting confused and they don't understand what our expectations are. And not only that, they stop taking us seriously because we are being inconsistent. And if they stop taking us seriously, then they stop listening to us, which is really not favorable for any parent. So really, firmness, assertiveness, and consistency with the needed leniency and flexibility at certain times. So with this, I end the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And on behalf of Learning Buzzers, I thank you for your support. Please remember to follow Learning Buzzers on Instagram. The account is at Learning Buzzers. And also make sure to visit the Learning Buzzers official website at the link learningbuzzers-edutherapy.com. Thank you very much and goodbye for now. I look forward to our future episode.